Sure, thank you.
Sorry.
No worries. So like I already mentioned, these are the topics. And so what I will do is I'll go ahead and just briefly show you guys the questions that everyone has, and then I will let you go into small groups. I will give you guys, let's start with 20 minutes. And if you don't feel like that's enough time, we can go up to 25 or 30. So I'll do a check-in at 20 minutes and ask if we need 5 or 10 more minutes, or if we're ready to just start as a large group, we can do that then too. So first group, you're going to be answering the prompt. In what ways is disability identity similar to other identities? In what ways is it different? And then also, how do you think disability identity is socially constructed as opposed to simply a diagnosis? And how does that thought impact your work potentially?
So who was group 1?
Yes.
You guys got it?
So that's what you guys are going to
It's
be looking at. Group 2, you're going to be answering the questions, in what ways does society and its institutions, such as healthcare, criminal justice, or education, perpetuate ableism? And how can ableism intersect with other isms that we've talked about? And then what are the things we can do to combat those isms in society through our different disciplines or roles that we have? So group 2, okay, that's your guys' prompt. Group 3, what are some commonly held biases and assumptions about disabled people that may affect the quality of the healthcare they receive? And how may these biases and assumptions be influenced by disabled people with multiple identities marginalized by society? And then in that same vein, how can providers or other people in these roles in this class identify and reduce negative biases they hold towards disabled people? So that's group 3. And then lastly, group 4 is going to be doing what kinds of microaggressions may be frequently committed towards disabled people and their loved ones? How would you respond to such a microaggression? And what are the things to consider about making it easier or more difficult to respond? So the idea is that we have these large Post-it notes over here, and I also have these handouts with these prompts I'm going to be giving each of the groups. Each person in the group is more than welcome to jot down their own thoughts and feelings and other takeaways on your own handout. But then as a large group, one person will be in charge of kind of aggregating what everybody says and putting it on the large sticky note. I also encourage you guys, like these are things like I really want you to be Googling and looking at all the different evidence-based resources out there for the best ways to approach these topics. And feel free to keep a little list of the resources you find and share those with me if you want, so I can share that back out with the group. But yeah, so I'll give you guys about 20 minutes. You'll work on this as a group, write down your key takeaways on the Post-it note, and then at the end of the 20 minutes or however long you guys need, we'll come back as a large group and each person will share from the group. Or one person will share from each group. Any questions or anything before we get started? No? Okay. You have until 3:35. And I will do a check-in. And Steph and I will be walking around to help facilitate discussion and stuff. So you guys are free to go.
Oh, these are pad markers. These guys. You have a particular color. Yep.
It's a group 4.
Anybody back here?
Two to three. Three.
I mean, I did right on it. I didn't say my name. That's why we prep right.
I'm bringing them right now. Yep.
Which one are you guys? So that's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and put this on.
question, in what ways is disability identity similar to others? We kind of just talked about being in the minority or marginalized groups, that the disability can be visible or invisible. These are the similarities. Also involves social or political activism. Education of others is necessary and then can impact opportunities and the quality of life. And then the ways that disability identity is different from others. It may not be an identity that one has from birth. And then also the accessibility and advocacy laws.
Perfect.
And then for the second half of the questions, we did about the social constructs as opposed to being simply a diagnosis. And so accessibility can change the impact that the disability diagnosis has on one's life. Your life experience or community connections can change your point of view. Also, the values and beliefs that you have can also change that idea as well. There can be a change in the representation from what we see in media. And then also the awareness and education is needed on a different diagnoses. And then how might the idea of a disability being a social construct impact your work? That would be providing diagnosis can be impacted by family or society's view on disability, and then the presence of other opportunities or community involvement in activities, and then how well advocacy is received from others.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Janetta. I think you guys, it sounds like you guys got to a lot of different stuff, which is great. I think the only other things I might add is that, you know, for me, one of the things that stick out about disability, you kind of already touched on it when you wrote, like, you know, may not be an identity one has from birth, but it's a community that anyone can join at any time, right? And I think too, it has like that's that type of like social mobility, right? And I think another identity, like on this like graph that I would show, like that is kind of like that is class. You know, it's another one that you can kind of move through a ladder, so to speak, as well. But yeah, other than that, I think you guys got everything, which is really great. Anyone else have anything else they want to add to what group number one already shared? Again, you guys did a really good job. Okay. All right, group number two.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah, you can just name it.
So ours was about ableism in society. Our first question was, in what ways does society and its institutions perpetuate ableism? So we specifically looked into like healthcare system, criminal justice, and education systems. Julie had a really nice line that we kind of put at the top of ours, which is that institutions are protected often above the needs of the individual. And that was just kind of from sharing personal experiences as well as some of the resources we found online. One that showed that 33 to 50% of people killed by the police are people with disabilities, which compares to, you know, up to 20% of the population only that consists of people with disabilities. So that's specific to like the criminal justice system. In terms of healthcare, we read a lot of and talked about stories of people who have often been misdiagnosed because they've had a disability because their needs have just been overlooked. Also just facing inadequate treatment. Physicians are less comfortable when they have to take care of a patient with a disability. They might not have the environment of a healthcare office set up to accept a person with a disability. And then in terms of like the education system, we just had a lot of general discussions about how there are lower expectations for people with disabilities in the education system. And then I think Jamie made a really great point about how the education system sometimes will be like, oh, these supports are working for you, so you might no longer need them anymore, instead of being like, oh, they work for you, let's keep going with them, let's build on them. So our next point was the intersection of ableism with other isms. We didn't have as much time to jot down all of these, but we talked about how interactions with law enforcement can be more dangerous for people who have a disability, and also have the intersection of like racism as well. And we saw that more than half of disabled African Americans have been arrested. As one of our stats on that, we talked about classism, families with lower socioeconomic status have reduced access to services and opportunities if they have children who have developmental disabilities. We also had some discussions about sexism. Women with disabilities might be, or other people who are looking to have reproductive health rights might be less likely to get access to those services because they have a disability, and they might not be considered like that they would be interested in those services. So we had that discussion as well. And then the last one, which was a hard one, which is combating ableism and other isms. We were like, okay, now how do we solve all of this? We just kind of had some general discussions on improving education and advocacy in our societies, our roles as individuals in professional spaces, as advocates for people who may experience different isms than we might experience ourselves. Policy reform, community building, and just in general, better media representation for people with disabilities. So that way we can help to normalize and help to, I guess, just improve in general awareness for what their needs are and not make it as much of a taboo as it currently is. And that's what we had. Thanks.
There is so much excellent stuff in everything that you had said. I think one thing I want to highlight is I love the call for community building. I think is something in a healthcare field that if your only exposure to people with disabilities is typically in your role as a healthcare provider, it's very easy to start building up some biases and assumptions about people with disabilities, not just in your health, not just in your field, but then when you go out and about in the world. So, you know, like I had mentioned, like in the implicit bias training that we did, like I would really encourage you all to create, like find like that prejudice breaking habit of creating opportunities to seek out people who are different from you, to learn from them, to learn their culture, to learn their way of life. So I think that was a great one. Anyone else have anything they want to add to what group 2 shared? You guys did a great job.
Just add some of the staggering statistics that you guys shared. We all know that like those horrible issues are still around every day, but one of the things that has always stuck with me was a 4-part docuseries by Ava DuVernay called When They See Us. Anybody seen this? So like huge trigger warning, especially part 4, because it's all about the person. So ultimately the story is the Central Park 5 is what they were labeled as, the murder of a not the murder, the rape of a Central Park jogger, and just all of the horribleness that went around labeling these 5 young men, minors, I will say that, minors, weren't even actually, so adolescents, with this crime. And just watch it, you guys. It will, I mean, if those statistics didn't already like alert your guts, just like something's wrong, like this will get you fired up. So When They See Us, it's on Netflix. It is phenomenally done, and I just, yeah, I can't recommend it enough. And build that passion and that fire for how do we do better? How do we do better for our individuals with disabilities? Because especially part 4 was all about the young man who had very little time. And then this all happened in 1989 and then early 1990s, so it's not that long. It's many of us. I don't know. It's in my life.
Group 3, who would like to share? Okay.
Okay, so we talked about implicit bias. And so our first topic related to what are some commonly held biases and assumptions about disabled people that may affect the quality of the healthcare they receive. And so some of the big ones that we pulled out were the bias that folks with disabilities are not competent to make their own decisions. They don't have autonomy. They don't have like a decision-making capacity. Kind of related along those lines is that the assumption that all disability implies a cognitive deficit or implies intellectual disability. A couple of others that we talked about is that sometimes in this, I think this is maybe like a little bit newer and among like parents of younger children, but that all developmental delay or all cognitive delay falls under the umbrella of autism, and that's sort of like, oh, everybody's a little bit on the spectrum these days. And the idea too that individuals with disabilities can't also have mental health diagnoses, or if they do, that it falls under the umbrella of their disability. The second question asked us to think about the influence of multiple identities. And so kind of going along with some of the things that have been talked about previously with ableism, I think it's highly influenced by intersectionality. And so we talked about both the culture of not only like the family and the cultural background of the person with a disability. Different cultures have different perceptions of what is developmentally appropriate and may have different conceptions of disability itself. There are certainly, reflecting back to some of the different models of disability that exist in different parts of the world. It could even be seen as like a moral failing or kind of a kind of in more of like a religious light. And so those are some things that we thought about. And the other thing that goes along with that too, as the prior group discussed, is that in general, kind of the intersectionality of if a person with a disability has other identities that may marginalize them in society in general, the higher the impact on their quality of care. And so if you're a person with a disability who also has low socioeconomic status, or also has or is also in a marginalized ethnic or racial group, that will also impact your ability to receive care. And then finally, the final question asked us to look at some effective ways providers can identify and reduce negative biases they may hold toward disabled people. And so we sort of thought about what are some strategies that can be used to counteract that. And I think some things that we arrived at are just sort of like assuming that people have agency, assuming that people, have competence, and really trying to include the patient. One of the things that I think about too is for patients who take longer to speak, or for patients who take longer to process, kind of building in that time and space for patients to have that time to think and respond, and kind of meeting people where they're at in terms of just the speed of how things flow in an office visit. There is a study that's been done about, I think this was doctors specifically, that usually patients are allowed to have 7 seconds of uninterrupted speech before a provider cuts in at the beginning of a visit. And so trying to build in that time for patients to talk about themselves and give you their own story can go a long way. And those were some of the things we talked about.
I think that last study you just shared is super interesting. I think that's definitely like a lot. I would love to see a lot more research like that being done of like what are the, yeah, that is super interesting. Well, thank you.
I don't know if that number is totally accurate, but it was something that was despairingly low.
I mean, it feels, I don't know, it feels accurate. I don't know when I say that, but yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me too much, but still, that's really good information to
Even
have.
say you go on your own care, like in your own visits, like how often, and maybe it's not necessarily like, maybe you are just doing a nonverbal like nodding or kind of thing, but like, how often are you finding yourselves like kind of interjecting when you're working? So just being more mindful of that in general. And just because it was a study with doctors doesn't mean we're all not doing the same. Yeah.
Yeah, it just made me reflect on like the questions I asked in an evaluation. I have the tendency that I'm acknowledging now is if a parent doesn't answer right away, I give examples. And then that also I have found kind of puts the question into a pocket of like a parent only thinking single-mindedly of like the example I gave. So just being cognizant of that and just like allowing, I guess, again, this processing space.
Maria and Kaylee, I would be curious to know if this is something you've ever heard too, but when I went to a conference, the speaker had said that they learned from their SLP friends that it's ideal to wait at least 10 seconds for a response from someone when you ask them a question. So they have full time to process the question and think of their response. That's what I always try to do, is wait 10 seconds. Yeah, go ahead. I don't know if that's something you guys have ever heard, or if you have any tips for that.
At least I did at Miami, we were required to take like a counseling class, just like counseling patients in healthcare and stuff. And one of the big topics within that class was how to be an active listener. And I think that we really talked about just like sitting and waiting for them to like let you know that they're ready for your response. So that sounds familiar, but I don't know that it's like
6-second rule, but I guess
6
now it's 10.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah.
So, yeah, maybe 6 to 10. It can vary. Results may vary. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, thank you guys. An awesome work. And so we'll go into our last group, group 4. What did we talk about?
So our self-reflection topic was on microaggressions. The first question was what kinds of microaggressions may be frequently committed towards disabled people and their loved ones. And a very common one was was telling their loved ones that they're so nice and putting them on a pedestal every time they're with their disabled loved one. And using terminology that's regressive, like handicapped and the R word. And even when we give compliments to disabled people, saying you did so well for someone with a disability, that's stripping them away of their individual achievement. And being dismissive of their thoughts and feelings, over assuring that help is needed. And also telling people that they don't look disabled or they're not performing as what is expected from someone who is disabled. And also shock at accomplishments or academic skills, and telling either the loved one or disabled people that you're doing the best that you can, and asking parents to lower their expectations, and telling them not to have kids anymore or to have another kid to make up for the first one. The second question was how we would respond to a microaggression committed towards a disabled person or a loved one. And we thought it was best to question them and ask them why they're saying what they're saying or what makes them say what they said, and not be judgmental towards someone who just said something that wasn't the most the most sensitive, and being curious and refraining or restating, sorry, refraining or stating it in an appropriate manner, and modeling it so that, especially in a clinician and a parent appointment, modeling it so that the parents will know that these are the right and the sensitive terms to say, and this is how, this is how to speak in order to make their child feel comfortable. Explaining why certain language is not preferred and it's not okay, and bring back to shared knowledge and why it's inappropriate or wrong. And the third question was what things make it easier or more difficult for you to respond to the microaggression? I think when it's among colleagues, it can be difficult at the same or the lower level, because it can come from a preachy place if you're at the same level. And doing it in a group could seem like you're belittling a person or trying to show them up. And if it also depends upon the relationship that you have with the person who just said something that was pretty insensitive. They might, if you're really close, then they might take offense in that, I'm not this way. Why are you calling me out? And if you're not close, then you might not know how to approach it and like tell them that this is not right. And also for when we respond, I think it's important that we take into account whether it's this is the first time it's happening or it's a one-off chance, and it's been happening repeatedly, and that could help us address it. If it's happening repeatedly, maybe we should be more stern with how we address it. And if it's a one-off chance, maybe just be more empathetic and gentle in letting them know. It doesn't have to be oh, you shouldn't be saying this.
Yeah, you guys killed that. I mean, you guys covered so many awesome things. I think you guys did a great job. I think, one thing I would consider, especially if you all are in a position where you're able to be leaders and set up the structure for a meeting, I think to your point about, it can feel kind of awkward to have to call someone out in the moment. I know from Dare to Lead, Brene Brown, one of the strategies that she had said that I actually really liked was making time at the end of the meeting where everyone can write something on a sticky note. Like, was there anything that was said or done that maybe like we should address before we end the meeting today, and like let everyone submit a sticky note, and that way that's a space where someone can write down like, I heard this said, and I just wanted whoever said it to like maybe explain more where they were coming from type thing. So I think that's like one idea for that, but yeah, I think you all raised some excellent points, and like I said, I think you guys covered everything really otherwise, so great job. Anything?
Found something redeeming in the Brene Brown.
Yes, absolutely, yes, yeah. Yeah, well, you know, trying not to be too black and white.
You're being curious.
And neutral curious, that's the training I got, that's what they call that.
Like, here's my shot, my heard that thing.
Yeah,
No, but I think
No.
that goes back to even the ITT, like, why can't we pull that into ITT? We all talked about the tablet being like, okay, not okay, but like, just using a regular old Post-it note, like, the
Yeah.
Mary has in front of her, right? And then we write those things down and bam, tell Erica, add it to the plan for next year, making it better.
anyone else have any comments or things to add for what group 4 did? Okay. I just wanna just pause really quick and say you guys did such a great job. I mean, I know like I'm the diversity fellow, but like I really want you all to walk away feeling like you all are the diversity fellows. And I feel like you guys showed that in this exercise. That's super awesome. So for the sake of time, we'll kind of build the break into the group activity. So like as you're doing the activity, if you feel the need to step away and do something else while your group mates work on something, feel free to do that. That's totally okay. So what I'm gonna do then actually is I'm also not gonna read out the scenarios for the sake of time, but I'm gonna go ahead and hand them out. Hopefully, if you guys have it on Canvas, you can access the stuff that way too. Go ahead and read over your scenarios that assigned to your group and respond to the questions that are there. And we'll start passing out the handouts too.
I don't know. There's one, there's two, 1 and 3 and 4. Who was 3 again? You guys were 4. Or I'm taking one pause.
Hey, can I have everyone's attention really quick? I know I just handed those stuff out. We'll give like 25 minutes for this one, and we'll do the same caveat as last time, where if at 25 minutes you feel like you still need more time, we can give maybe 5 more minutes and then go over as a large group. And then for the big sticky note stuff, feel free with this one. It's not as required. I definitely wanted to have. I love that you guys put these up because as you're working on these scenarios, feel free to get up and look at some of the stuff that's been written around and see if that might help you address the cases that you guys have. But regardless, we'll go back and you guys work on this for the next 25 minutes, and at 4:35, we'll come back as a large group and talk about each of the cases.
I know, thank you. She's like, you walk with me. How would you? I know you described them as yeah. I've seen them, yeah. So I think it's like, well, sounds like this scenario is very different. It has to be like that. Yeah. So it's like, you see the patient. Like, nobody understands that. So we do lives. We'll be sitting in our. Okay, but we have like supervision. Okay. Okay. This is coming from, okay, so family's not. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Or if you see the.
Sessions, it's so interesting because it's. But it was still like even wasn't saying it, we have a meeting and it's a discussion. And we can have that with you. Because don't say, I mean, it was it's. Yeah. Especially, yeah, especially and that's what's even when I bus. That's the most. Yeah. We're like not like, okay, we're just saying like. Yes. No, you're like affirming that, like you're affirming that you. Yeah. So you're trying to like take that in. Right. I think to this, I think you're good, like, I don't know how to say that. It is important to say. I think learning about like blah blah like isn't that you need to go back like I like like and then I find out if they actually yeah. Like exactly or just like and like without what like mentioning these like prompting just to see how the and so and then they're all taking I special ideas yeah. I don't know how old we get. So like some of those.
How's this one?
So you started. That's really good. Yeah. We were talking about like slow being like different, like special. Like we're trying to like, I don't want to say the word disabled, but we're trying to say they're different. Bad way.
Yeah.
So we're using special as well. Slow being different.
Absolutely, yeah.
So finding out what they mean by slow and then trying to figure out how to.
No, I think that's a good call out. Like, I think the response to a term like slow versus special.
Yeah. Yeah, like, my assumption would be that I'm talking about the clients that I've traditional but again, I think most.
I think it's like, for like,
I think, like, having to bring that is like. I don't know what you mean, but that's how I would say that. I want to come off like. Which way is a struggle for me, because I'll ask the question. You need to bring that. I was like, I don't have to do that. Because that's what I feel like, are you saying that? I think. Okay, so I think what makes really like, like, I've been learning about this. I've learned how to think like, also it's really, because you know, stuff that like, over specialists typically not for like, I ask like, bring your issue. Yeah. Kind of leaving the door open, or maybe I don't know, something even though I should reach out to them for is like, so like, like, yeah, as like, why special, right? Because the patient shared with me was like, to me, preferred as special, you know, kind of like bringing it back to the patient themselves, as a person, not just patient.
I do feel like one place a lot of providers need to be heard, which like I mentioned before, it's like something you're like, that's like very not last week. We share the Mary Ann. I think it's like, you know, it's interesting, it's like this concept. But yeah, I think a lot of providers, if you're really caregivers, that is the one. Yeah, so I think that's a great like ask of where is this knowledge coming from? Yeah, exactly, that too, yeah, yes.
Yeah, and so. Out there.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah. So, like, but that's like, the thing, like, for me, not, it's. A great way, but I don't like pick one, three. And I had to adjust some of those words,
I like it.
Yeah.
I like that idea of like giving something else to say. And like I think when like it's about change, it's easier to. Yeah, so like you know, say, you know, just like say like whatever you do,
Like, don't say that, say this.
and we usually make it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
If you have it submitted, like if not, then. If you have it.
And then, but if you have it, okay, you know, if you are at the university, right, like, and really,
What about like, you know, let's say.
So maybe.
Hold on, I'm gonna bother you.
So we're gonna do some. Say. Okay, fine, he's like. So it's like, I gotta take away my response. Yeah, I think it's awesome. Which one? Yep.
I'm really
Oh, so right now versus later. Right. Think about, but like, like, I actually. I'm curious in these situations, it should be about me. In these terms, especially, it makes me feel really, but you know, but let's say yeah, to have those, actually. With the backs. I think these are good reflections of like your age. Yes.
Yeah, so I guess, so like, I didn't know.
I'm gonna like counter that.
But the thing is, the audience, we're really. Well, no, I mean, that's like, really-
She's like, great, now I gotta leave my party. Yeah.
No, I have, I didn't.
But I'm not sure. Yeah. We'll see you Tuesday. It's fun. Congrats. Practice walking. Yeah, like it's so boss like this is just one more thing. How bad does this look? I've ruined this part. I need to write a new one. A looks like handwriting. It looks like a and young real talk. I wrote instead of on. And then I wrote unless. We have to have to get a new car.
Good shit up.
All right, I'm writing this one to Patty. I know. I know. Buddy, Jenna. There's a bunch of them. I'm sorry, Johnny. Yes. Yes. Supervisor. It's like, jumped in.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And a what? Oh, she got one on Brightsville. Volunteer. Brightsville. Oops. Where I'm at.
So we could be like, I could be like, oh, it's not, and then everyone's like, you did that. Oh, you know. No, we were for me.
Yeah. No. I know you can get it. You won't make it rich.
I don't know if I have any more research going on, I wish I did. I think this might have been my last flowers one. This would be nice. Thank you.
Extremely. So that's like super like. Yeah. It's not what you think. What do you think? What do you think? Yeah, psyche is fun. I know, it's like. I think that you have 5 years and then you do like 1 year. Internship. Yeah. So like, where you're like.
Are you guys feeling ready in the next minute or two to share?
Yes.
Oh, sure, go ahead, yes. Yay.
I love it. Back here,
All right, great. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and bring it back to a large group discussion. Yes. All right, so what I'm gonna do, if everyone can wrap up conversations, thank you. What we're gonna do is I'll read out each of the scenarios. So we'll start with group one. I'll read the scenario and then group one can share what they talked about. And then we'll just do that for each of the subsequent scenarios. So this is the scenario that group one got. So in this scenario, Christina is a 7-year-old girl with cerebral palsy coming to DDBP with her mom for a follow-up appointment regarding her newly prescribed forearm crutches. During the appointment, you notice Christina is not acting like her usual bubbly self. Christina's mom tells you that Christina has constantly been receiving questions and comments from her classmates about her new use of forearm crutches. While some questions and comments have been inquisitive in nature, others seem to be making fun of Christina. So if somebody from group one would like to grab the mic, maybe someone who hasn't already talked yet, and just share their response to these questions.
Okay, so the first thing prior to talking with Christina, we talked about like making sure that we check in to make sure the reason why she isn't acting herself is because of the concerns with the crutches and like being made fun of in class. We also wanted to find out how she feels about using the crutches. Does she like using them? Does she not like using them? And I think that can help guide the direction of conversation. Because you don't want to go in it at one way and then find out that's not how she feels about it at all, and then have to backtrack and kind of fix the conversation that you already started. When talking to her, we wanted to ask Christina how she feels, like how useful are the crutches? Like what do you like? What do you not like? And ask for more details about the experiences with her classmates, kind of everything that is involving. And then also not ignoring that there is a problem. We talked about finding the fine line there is between talking about how Christina does have a disability and she does need accommodations to be mobile in the same way that her classmates are, but not so in a way that she is limited in like not able to do the things that she wants to do. And so that's like kind of a hard balance to play. But it's important to have these conversations as kids are kids and they get older, because they are gonna notice that they have different experiences than their peers, or even from their siblings and things like that. And then for the last part, we kind of talked about a couple different things, one of which like a parent could help provide education to the class, maybe come in and read a book, different ways to engage the classmates in learning about different ways of transportation. And also like including Christina's teacher in this conversations to find out more information, to find out what could be helpful in the situation and what support could be provided. Then also practicing with Christina at home ways to respond to her peers in these different ways. Whether that is just like talking about her disability, talking about how her crutches help her, or responding to like bullying comments.
I really love the suggestion of having mom go to the school and do some type of education for the class, because I think really like, I mean, even in the way that I wrote this question, I think it does put the onus on the person with the disability to respond to these things. And that's something we definitely want to try and avoid. And I think it's really a creative way of thinking outside the box of, I mean, like even as us, like in healthcare fields, like, is there a possibility that we could provide some of that education or help the parent come up with that learning activity that they're going to do with the class and support them in any way to get there and to do that? I think a lot of that change, it really is a lot more beneficial to try to reduce the ableism in society than rather build up the resilience in the person. I think it's good to do both, but I think doing one or the other, I think kind of you have to do both basically. So I really liked that idea. So good job. Anyone else have anything they want to add to this situation or any of the questions or considerations that were shared? Okay. All right, so this is the second scenario. So group two, we're gonna have you go next. Damien is a 13-year-old Black boy with ADHD and high IQ. Damien has been receiving typical middle school education in the Cincinnati public school system, but his parents are considering moving to Indian Hill so that Damien can complete high school within their gifted program. When Damien is asked about this potential change, he responds, "I don't want to go to that school. Those kids are nothing like me or my friends." So group two, how did you respond to these questions?
Yeah, so we had a really great discussion about this. For number one, we first talked about demographic and just community differences between the community that Damien lives in now and Indian Hill. Wikipedia says that Indian Hill has about 0.6% African American or Black population. So we don't know the exact area that Damien and his family live in within Cincinnati, but overall, that's quite a stark difference. And so we were kind of emphasized, especially in middle school years, especially for kids with ADHD, the importance of identity and belonging within communities, and how he might feel like he might not belong in a community like Indian Hill. Parental pressure is also might be an influence on Damien's response. Feeling really supported at his current school. We talked about how he likely was identified as being eligible for a gifted program or testing into a gifted program because he was doing well. So feeling like he's doing well and maybe getting the accommodations he needs for his ADHD at his current school. Yeah, I think I think, yeah, we were talking also about just parents being really impressed by the gifted program and the opportunities that it could give for Damien. And Damien's potential concerns for being singled out as gifted if he has to be pulled out of classes, and that kind of being as a Black young man or adolescent, being potentially singled out kind of double effect, kind of thinking about the intersectionality there. We talked about pros and cons of, was that the second question, of receiving a typical high school education at his current school versus the gifted program at Indian Hill. Pros potentially being better resources within the school system, potentially more resources to succeed or better education with that gifted programming and access to scholarships or networking. These are all kind of question marks. We don't know 100% about the school district he's coming from. Cons being leaving that social support that he seems to have at school and the comfort that he has there. Fear of being isolated or not fitting in, knowing how important social adjustment is and developing that identity for Damien. And then for working with Damien and his family, we just wanted to come at it with curiosity, especially and involve Damien in the process because he is 13 and this is his own education, especially in high school. So really sitting down with them and hearing both of their perspectives, especially from the parents hearing, what they feel they want to get Damien to get out of the gifted program, and how we could potentially meet in the middle of addressing Damien's social concerns and making sure he's supported socially, feels represented in his school community, while also giving him the education supports that he needs to thrive. So potentially suggesting other schools that Damien might have friends at, or might be within a community where he didn't have to move from his current home, I think would be a suggestion that we could give to meet in the middle. Anything?
Well, I think you all made some really great points. I think it, like, just emphasizing kind of like what you said at the end, like just trying to find that middle ground. I think definitely want to uplift like Damien's perspective and his experience, because ultimately it is him going through school. But obviously, like any parent, like these parents are obviously very invested in getting the best out of their kid. So how do you balance that? I think is the question. And I think you guys consider a lot of different things for making that or achieving that balance. So I think that's great. Anything else? Anyone want to share about this scenario or the questions that are listed? So now we're going to move on to case number 3. So in scenario number 3, Casey is an 11-year-old child with autism that identifies as non-binary and uses they, them pronouns. Casey has been referred to you for treatment, and you notice in the referring provider's note that Casey has not shared their gender identity or preferred pronouns with the family members that bring them to clinical visits. All right, so someone from group 3 want to walk us through how you responded to these questions?
So the first question asked if we would use the patient's preferred pronouns. And I think as a group, we decided that just to prioritize safety in these moments, because it seems like the patient doesn't feel comfortable discussing it with their family. So when with the family using the assigned gender pronouns, but then like if we get the opportunity to talk with the patient alone or one-on-one, which is what the third point is saying, then we would be sure to validate this patient's feelings and, any microaggressions or any type of discrimination they might be experiencing because of their preferred pronouns or non-binary identity. And then also, I think we discussed providing education to the family and also being open to facilitating the conversation with the patient if they don't feel comfortable doing that on their own, carving out time in session to open that space up to have support for them in that moment. And then related to preferred pronouns and medical chart, I think we decided that we would just use the patient's name as much as we could and refrain from using pronouns. And if we did use pronouns, it seems pretty natural to use they, their in medical notes as opposed to like verbal speech, which it might be more challenging. And we also talked about the sensitive note feature on Epic that could not make all the notes accessible to the family. I think that was all. Did I miss anything? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think in general too, another question I have for this scenario, but I don't want to overload you guys, was like thinking in general, like if you're not going to use the patient's preferred pronouns during the visit, what are other ways you can provide gender affirming care? And I love that idea of just like, even during the visit, like if you just want to use the patient's name, because you have that knowledge in the back of your mind that the pronouns the family is using is not what the kid prefers, but you're not going to necessarily raise flags to the family if you're just using the patient's name to refer to them either. So I feel like that's a really good middle ground approach for that. So great job. Anyone else for this scenario? Any other thought? Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
I know we're fortunate at our hospital to have our gender affirming clinic, and there are like within Epic different flags that you can have. So I might consult with a staff member in that clinic because they might be able to place a flag that these are the patient's preferred pronouns, but in these settings, these are the pronouns that you should be using for the patients.
Yes, I love that call out. Yeah, definitely. I would work that Epic flag system to the advantage. Go ahead and staff again.
I was just gonna say the sensitive note. Just always being mindful of the legal pieces, so like double checking what a team need. When you mark sensitive, there was, I wanna say in 2019, a law that basically said we were prohibited from doing that any longer. So I wanna say it was 2019, you remember this, Jen?
I do, but
Okay, so just checking into that.
Yeah.
Something we could also check into.
I think it's the CARES Act or something like that.
It wasn't the CARES, well, I don't remember, I will speak out of turn, but I know that there is something that basically, like, you just have to be mindful, you can't just, like, those notes could be subpoenaed, and then you have to have a justification, and
Is it medical and like mental health?
everyone's, everyone in health center. Yeah. So, yeah.
I guess my understanding is that typically you can block notes from being for a patient portal if there's incredible threat to the patient's safety. And so I think it's in situations where
Yeah, but I think that's a good point that we should look into that. How that counts. Right, you know about that? Like, I don't know. She got it. I don't know for that. That's all.
anything else for this scenario? Any other considerations or things? And if you have anything that comes up from previous scenarios, feel free to just share those too. If not, we'll go to our last scenario. So this was group 4 scenario. And this scenario is that you and your supervisor are working with a family that has a child with Fragile X syndrome. While preparing to see the family, your supervisor uses terms like slow, special, and unique to refer to the child's condition. So group 4, how are we responding to that?
Thank you for this question. So our first response here is how would you encourage your supervisor to use other language to describe the child's condition? Using the terms slow, special, and unique. We kind of looked at those all kind of in different ways, lumping kind of slow and special and unique together. So coming from like a curious and respectful lens of, can you help me, understand when you describe the patient as slow,
What does that mean? So I can better be prepared, when seeing the patient, and then depending on the response, oh, like, thank you for sharing that with me. Like, when you said that, I thought you meant this instead. Whatever assumption that you could be making in that aspect. Kind of understanding where the terms came from, because some families do use those terms to describe their child, or is this something that the patient prefers to be called special? I don't know, but referring back to the patient and where the language came from, referencing the things that we've learned about in Lend of like, oh, I've learned that a lot of self-advocates prefer these terms versus using special or unique. And then like offering like replacement language. And then pros and cons of choosing to address the language right away. So pros would be reducing the chance that they would use it with the family or another scenario later, reduces chance of changing history, and reduces defensiveness. Con is you might not have the best education or kind of know how to respond in that moment, might be limited on time, and just kind of the general dynamics with the supervisor of how to address it. Pros and cons of addressing it later. So pro would be gives you time to educate yourself on like the topic, how to respond, and maybe if you have an emotional response to have a crucial conversation, kind of can prepare yourself to set those emotions to the side. For someone like me, have to rehearse what I'm going to say so I don't get like mean about it. Compared to Nicole, who like comes up with these phrases so nicely. And so it gives you some time to consult with someone else like Nicole or Simon and phone a friend. A con would be like run out of time, you could forget. The feedback wouldn't be timely and it's not clear and transparent in that moment. Pros and cons of not addressing it. So, you don't want to like anger your supervisor or kind of like put your safety at risk, depending on the relationship that you have. Con would be like, it's just not addressed. There's no change and the words and harmful connotation can continue with other people and potentially with other patients and families. And when we would choose to address this based on the pros and cons, we thought about on more than one in different ways. So starting with the term of slow, that be more in the moment. And then later on, when we had the opportunity to address the special and unique comments. Maybe even saying like, obviously, what did you mean? Or like, it made me uncomfortable when you use these terms.
Yeah, I think that was great. I think there's a lot in that response. I think one thing for me, another thing I would add to the list of things to consider for addressing it later, as a pro or a con, is that since this is like before the visit, you run the risk if you don't address it, that they might use that language during the visit while the family is there. And I think to your point though, I mean, if that's language the family was already using to describe the kid, then maybe that isn't as much of an issue. But if it wasn't, and that is the language that the provider chose to use during that visit, that might make things worse as well, potentially. But I do really like what you were saying about like knowing yourself and knowing like I know me and I know what I can handle in the moment and what I'm going to need to process and handle later. I think that is a really crucial aspect for these kinds of things. So I think you guys did a good job. Anything else that anyone wants to add or other considerations or thoughts? I'll go ahead and go to this slide. In general, things that, from all these scenarios or this session or just DEI learnings that we did over the year, anyone have any final questions, thoughts, ideas? Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
This is a little off topic, but I wanted to circle back to that study that I had mentioned. This was a study from 2018 Journal of General Internal Medicine. This was the Mayo Clinic. So these are, people who are good at medicine, supposedly.
Allegedly.
The results, key findings, clinicians elicited the patient's concern in 36% of encounters. So in 64% of encounters, providers didn't even ask the patients why they were there. And in the encounters in which clinicians elicited patient concerns, the clinician interrupted the patient after a median of 11 seconds. And so if you ask the patient why they're there and you give them more than 11 seconds to talk, you're doing better than all of these people.
Yeah, that is good to know. Thank you, Brad, for sharing that. Anyone else, any other things? If not, that's fine too. I just want to make sure. No?
I just have two things. One, a lot of what we've discussed this afternoon goes back to, I oftentimes find myself saying when I get, especially that last scenario, like, oh, why did that knowledgeable professional who's an expert in their field, why did they do that, right? Like, not everybody was Len trained and it shows sometimes, right? But now you all have been Len trained, right? So we are going to go out and do amazing things. Call to action, right? Take these skills that you've learned this year. Go do great things for your patients, your families, your systems, your communities. Ruthie.
I was just gonna say, I'm very thankful that we have the space to have hard discussions about these topics and then just get ideas from different professionals of what they've used. And then practicing that elevator speech to have good outcomes and change and be the change in our system.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. I think that is absolutely the best strategy for these things, is to be thinking about them before they happen. I think that's a really good way to handle this stuff for sure. Cool. Well, if nothing else, then like it says on the slide, thank you guys for your time and your participation.
Great way to end. It was?
Yes, and in Braille as well, and a bunch of different languages. Yeah.
Yes, so.